The tension in the courtroom was thick, an undercurrent of murmurs rippling through the gathered spectators as they found their seats. Overhead, the dull hum of fluorescent lights filled the otherwise silent space, casting a harsh glow on the wooden benches and the no-nonsense judge sitting at the front. Detective Samuel Hayes, a seasoned law enforcement officer, tugged at his tie and squared his shoulders, exuding the ease of a man who had been through this process countless times. This was just another case, another defendant who would crumble beneath the weight of his testimony. His word carried authority. After all, he was the one with the badge, the law on his side. He had no reason to believe today would be any different. Across the courtroom, Ava Mitchell sat at the defendant's table, poised, composed. Her charcoal gray blazer was immaculate. Her deep brown skin contrasted against the pristine white of her shirt. Her posture was so stiff it could have been carved from stone. But it was her expression that was most striking, calm, knowing, as if she already understood how the day would unfold. Detective Hayes barely acknowledged her. To him, she was just another person trying to evade justice. What he failed to realize, what no one in that courtroom foresaw, was that this trial would unravel his entire career. The judge, an older man with silver-streaked hair and a weary demeanor, adjusted his glasses before looking up at the prosecutor. "Let's begin." Hayes stepped forward with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed his words. His tone was steady, professional. "Your Honor, on the evening of August 22nd, I conducted a traffic stop involving the defendant, Ava Mitchell, due to reckless driving. She refused to provide identification and became combative when asked to step out of the vehicle. Given her aggressive behavior and lack of cooperation, I had no choice but to detain her." His voice was unwavering, each word carefully chosen to support his narrative. The jury listened intently. This was, after all, just another routine case, a decorated officer's account against the civilians. Hayes continued, "Upon searching her vehicle, I discovered items that raised suspicion, leading me to believe she was involved in illicit activities. Given her resistance, I followed standard protocol and took her into custody." He turned to the judge with certainty. "I followed every procedure by the book." Ava remained still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She showed no reaction, no flicker of emotion. She was simply waiting. The judge nodded before shifting his gaze to Ava. "Ms. Mitchell, do you have anything to say before I make my ruling?" She stood slowly, adjusting the sleeves of her blazer with the deliberate grace of someone who was in complete control. Her movements were unhurried, confident. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began, her voice smooth yet commanding. "Before I present my response, I would like to submit a credential for the court's consideration." The prosecutor, already preparing to finalize the case, scoffed. The judge raised an eyebrow, but gestured for her to proceed. Ava reached in her bag and produced a sleek, black ID case. She handed it to the bailiff, who promptly delivered it to the judge. The moment he opened it, his expression changed. His eyes scanned the contents once, then again, his neutral demeanor now laced with surprise and something resembling respect. Hayes frowned, shifting in place. The judge cleared his throat. "What am I looking at here, Ms. Mitchell?" Ava met his gaze steadily. "That is my identification. I am Commander Ava Mitchell, a high-ranking officer in the United States Special Forces." The room fell silent. Hayes stiffened. His earlier confidence cracked. "I have completed multiple classified operations, served in elite military units, and endured some of the most rigorous training in existence," she continued. "I have dedicated my life to upholding the law and protecting this country." She let her words settle before locking eyes with Hayes. "And yet, this officer, who had never met me prior to that night, has just stood before this court and fabricated a version of events under oath." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The jury members exchanged glances. The entire courtroom had transformed. This was no longer a routine trial. It was an exposure. Ava reached into her bag once more, pulling out a small USB drive. "I would like to submit evidence for review," she said. "This contains footage from my vehicle's dashboard camera, which contradicts Detective Hayes' testimony." The judge signaled the bailiff to retrieve it. Within moments, the courtroom screen illuminated. The video was clear. every detail undeniable. Ava had been nothing but compliant. She had produced her ID at the first request. She had followed every instruction. The escalation had come entirely from Hayes, his tone sharp, his demeanor confrontational. The footage caught him growing increasingly hostile, threatening her without reason. And then came the most damning moment. The final clip showed Hayes speaking after the arrest, laughing with a fellow officer. "No one's going to take her word over mine," his voice sneered on the recording. "She's just another." The audio cut out. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge's expression darkened. The prosecutor visibly swallowed. "Your Honor," the prosecutor spoke up hastily, his voice tight. "In light of this new evidence, we request that all charges against Ms. Mitchell be dismissed immediately. Furthermore, we recommend an internal investigation into Detective Hayes' conduct." The judge's nod was sharp. Granted, Hayes' face had drained of color. The gavel came down, sealing his fate. Two officers approached him. For the first time in his long career, Detective Samuel Hayes was the one being led away. As he passed Ava, she observed him with the same quiet composure she had maintained all along. "You assumed I was just another woman you could manipulate," she said evenly. "Next time, do your job with honor." If there even is a next time, Hayes had no response. He understood what she meant. As Ava collected her belongings and walked toward the exit, the once hushed courtroom filled with murmurs, not of doubt, but of admiration. That day, justice wasn't just served, it was delivered with precision. And everyone left with a lesson they would not soon forget. Never judge someone based on what you assume about them, because you never know who they truly are. As Ava Mitchell stepped out of the courthouse, the warm afternoon sun bathed her face, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile air of the courtroom. The whispers and murmurs from the onlookers behind her still echoed in the corridor, a mixture of awe, respect, and disbelief at what had just unfolded. She had walked into that courtroom as a defendant, wrongfully accused, underestimated, dismissed. She walked out as something much greater, a woman who had not only cleared her own name, but had exposed a corrupt officer, shaken a flawed system, and reminded everyone in that room of a fundamental truth. Power without integrity is nothing. Reporters had already begun to gather, their cameras flashing, microphones extended, eager to capture a soundbite from the woman who had turned the tide in what was supposed to be an open-and-shut case. She had no interest in giving them the spectacle they craved. There would be no dramatic speeches, no self-congratulatory declarations. Instead, she adjusted her bag over her shoulder and moved forward, head held high, her steps measured and steady. She had no desire for vengeance, no satisfaction in watching a man's career crumble. Her victory wasn't about bringing someone down. It was about standing tall in the face of deception, about proving that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of rising. Behind her, Detective Hayes was led away, his expression blank, his once unshakable confidence reduced to silence. It wasn't just his badge that had been stripped from him today. It was his authority, his credibility, the illusion of invincibility he had hidden behind for years. He had built his career on assumptions, relying on the blind trust the system had afforded him. But trust, like respect, had to be earned, and in the end, he had lost both. Ava had seen men like him before, men who mistook their uniform for absolute power, who believed their word was law simply because it had always been accepted as such. But she had also seen something else. Justice, when pursued with persistence, had a way of catching up to those who abused their positions. As she stepped onto the city's sidewalk, a small smile played at the corner of her lips. Today, justice had won, and if she had anything to do with it, it always would.